Hello and welcome everybody to Into the Fire episode number 17, coming to you live from Tulsa, Oklahoma, right in the middle of the heartland, the 47th largest city in the country. It's April the 5th, 2024, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. For those of you that are joining us, welcome. We appreciate each and every one of you. Ronnie is coming from the great state of New York. Where are you at, Ronnie? Right now, where are you?
I'm in Watertown, New York, up by Fort Drum.
You're not getting any audio at the moment, but I'll tell you what, just pop in here in a second because you don't have any audio. He is basically coming from near Fort Drum, New York, which is a military base there, and his son is up there, etc. We've got an exciting show for you tonight. And Ronnie, when you get your sound back, just go ahead and pop in there. We've got an exciting show tonight. It's going to be Dan Reynolds, 26th Warden of Oklahoma State Penitentiary, which is also known as Big Mac here in Oklahoma. I'm sure that most states have a notorious maximum security type prison, maybe a prison where death row is, generally speaking. That's actually where Dan worked. He worked at that prison, and that's where he was a warden. Are you on? Still nothing. We had you just a second ago. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
Maybe X out and come back. But for whatever reason, we're not getting any audio from Ronnie. But nevertheless, we're gonna get after this. I want to tell you that last week, if you were a former police officer and you're watching this show, I highly recommend that you check out last week's episode, especially if you are a homicide detective. And the reason why is because it is about no body homicides, and that was with Tad DiBiase. And like I said, that's probably all of my episodes have been really my favorite. I love each and every one of these. But I think that we're getting just incredible guests, and no doubt this is going to be one for the books. Dan is an author of many books that relate to prisons and the stories behind that and things like that. We're going to detail each one of those and get after that. But like I said, that's what's up. Had an exciting week. I've been really busy, and in reference to that, I'm working on a case from 2015. And we made an arrest last night. I can't really get into all the ins and outs of that today, but down the line I will. Welcome back, Ronnie.
Can you hear me?
Still don't have any audio, so maybe he can check into that. And then in the meantime, what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start reading
Jason,
Dan's
do you want
bio.
to check your audio?
Once again, Dan is the 26th warden of Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He served as warden there from 1991 to 1994. He retired in November of 2011 after serving 31 years with the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. He began his career in October 1980, serving as a case manager at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center. That's near Lexington, Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. 2 years later, he accepted a lateral transfer to work with a deputy director of the Western Division of Institutions. 10 months later, he accepted a position as a classification auditor and movement coordinator. In 1985, he became an administrative assistant to the deputy director of the Western Division of Institutions. And then 2 months later, the deputy director was appointed as warden of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary and requested that Reynolds to accompany him to the penitentiary as an administrative assistant to the warden, which tells me that Dan apparently had it figured out. And that's exactly what we want here on the show. People that know what they're doing and are good at their jobs. And apparently he was, because he was moving up the ladder really quick. In 1987, he was appointed deputy warden at the Howard McLeod Correctional Center. And 9 months later, he was appointed warden at the McAlford Correctional Center, where he was tasked in the demolition and rebuilding of that facility following a riot, which occurred on May the 13th of 1988. I didn't know about that riot. That's interesting to me. In 1991, the Oklahoma State Penitentiary warden was activated during Desert Storm, and Reynolds served as an interim warden for 7 months, at which time the former warden returned, and Reynolds returned to McAlford Correctional Center. 3 months later, Reynolds returned to OSP as the warden. So he finally made it there. And of all the prisons, I'm telling you, this is probably the most notorious prison that we have in our state. Known as Big Mac. In 1991, he was nominated as Warden of the Year for the North American Association of Wardens and Superintendents. And in 94, Reynolds was named Administrator of Population Management, overseeing the agency's reception center process. In the year 2000, Reynolds was assigned to the Security and Investigative Division with oversight responsibilities of the newly developed intelligence unit after a gang-related homicide. While in the position, he was appointed by the agency director to chair and conduct security audits at all maximum, medium, and minimum security facilities. In 2006, Reynolds was appointed as administrator of Community Corrections Work Center, where he was responsible for the daily operations of approximately 30 community correction centers. And he's done so much more. I'll just tell you this, that he is basically the recipient of the 1998 Community Distinguished Former Student Award from University of Central Oklahoma, and he's a recipient of the William Parker Outstanding Graduate Student Award for 2005. He's a lifetime member of the Oklahoma Correction Employees Memorial Foundation and the Correctional Peace Officers Foundation. And with all of that said, and there's even more, there's just so much more to talk about. Ronnie, are you with us at this point?
I am. Can you hear me?
No, you're still not coming through, buddy. I can't read what you're saying, but I'm sure that you will figure it out. With that said, let's bring on Dan Reynolds. How you doing, sir?
Good.
It's great to have you with us, honestly.
It's certainly an honor for me to be here.
And I've got nothing from him too.
Hey, Dan, can you hear me?
I don't know what the deal is. We're having issues.
Will you tell Jason that you can hear me?
Yes, Jason, I can hear Ronnie.
Jason left us. Dan, I appreciate you coming on. For those that don't know, my uncle also worked for DOC, and we were trying to find a guest for the show, and he suggested you. So as Jason was saying, I'm glad you're here. And if you don't mind, will you kind of take us to how your beginnings with DOC and
Sure. When I was in college, I was actually pre-med. I was going to the University of Oklahoma, and had worked as an EMT in college and wanted to go down the path of medicine and become a doctor. And my father was paying for my education, and I always made real good grades in science. But if it had any complicated math, physics, calculus, whatever, it used to just eat my lunch. And so it dawned on me that if I'm going to continue to go through college, I need to get in something that I can get in and get out. And so I kind of switched gears. But my interest in corrections went all the way back to 8th grade, where I had to do a book report. And I went to the school library and I found a book on prisons. And I can tell you to this day and describe to you what the book looked like. I ended up doing a book report, and it always had an interest for some reason. With that book report, I went to the local jail and interviewed the local sheriff, talked to him about the operations. He gave me a tour of the Cleveland County Jail, and I was just really fascinated. But I ended up moving from the University of Oklahoma to Central State in Edmond, and I heard these two guys talking in a health class, and one asked the other what he was majoring in. He said criminal justice. And so I said, well, that's interesting. I said, I might take a couple of those classes, because I was thinking about changing majors, and I changed to business, and I took a couple of classes and I really didn't like. And I didn't really have an interest in business. So I was really looking for something else. But when I heard these two guys talking about criminal justice, it piqued my interest, and I took some classes. And the more classes I took, the more I really enjoyed them. And so I just got drawn in to criminal justice. And when I graduated, I really didn't know what I really wanted to do. So I was in the process applying for the FBI. I applied for OB and DD, and some other law enforcement agencies in Oklahoma. And the Department of Corrections was one of them. And they offered me an interview. It was the first interview or the second one I had, and it was at Lexington, and is for a case manager position. And so they made the offer to hire me as a case manager, and so I started doing that. And I always thought in the back of my mind that, if this didn't work out, or if I didn't like it, I was going to find something else and leave. But after 31 years, I was still there. So.
Nice. So if you're a case manager, and hopefully Jason's hearing me now, but if you're a case manager, are you back in the cell blocks and stuff on a regular basis, or what exactly does that person do?
Yeah, the case manager, actually, I had an office on one of the units, the housing units, and it was for new inmates coming in to the prison. It was an orientation unit, and I was over the disciplinary unit too. I used to go to the disciplinary unit, talk to the inmates that have been locked up for rule violations. But basically what a case manager did was basically maintain the inmates' visiting log, their telephone log. They had to approve the visitors. They had to prove who the inmates could and could not talk to. We did parole summaries for inmates where we would submit a recommendation to the parole board, advising the parole board if I would recommend parole for them or not, and justify whatever my decision was, one way or the other.
Okay.
Classification, I classified inmates, determined when they would be minimum security, where they could transfer to lower security, or if they got in trouble, I could reclassify them as well to send them to maximum security, to higher security. Okay. So it is basically maintaining basically the inmate status throughout his tenure at that facility.
Okay. And Jason, I don't know when you had to step away, but basically he started with kind of going through school and how he ended up at DOC, and then in there he talked about his first job was one of those case managers. And how did your career progress after that? Because eventually you became a warden. I know Jason's got some other specific questions he wanted to ask, but I just thought we'd get kind of a foundation of the different jobs you had throughout your time with DOC, and then we'll get into some more of the specifics that I think Jason's wanted to ask about.
Okay. When I first started in case management, I was there for probably about a year and a half, and then I applied for a senior case manager position, which was a supervisory position, and I got that job. So I supervised some other case managers, but the warden at that facility that hired me, he got promoted to a deputy director for the Western Division of Institutions in Oklahoma, and he was basically responsible for about half of the prisons in the state of Oklahoma, everything west of I-35, basically. And so he knew me, and I knew him, and he had an administrative assistant job open, and so I had applied for that. I didn't get that job, but he had another position, which was a case manager slot. So he asked me if I'd take a lateral and fill that position for him, which I agreed. So I was with him for just a short period of time, and then we had some budget cuts, and they had to make some cuts in headquarters. The legislators said headquarters was too fat, and they needed to send people out to the field. And I had just been hired recently, and so I was the one that had to go back in the field. And so that's when I went back and became a classification auditor, and I did that for about a year and a half. And then Gary Maynard, the deputy director, his administrative assistant job came back open, so I applied for that again, and then I was hired. And then about a month later, he found out that the director wanted him to go down to the penitentiary because they were having some issues and problems, and they were terminating the warden of the penitentiary. So as a warden from the penitentiary was driving to Oklahoma City to the director's office to be fired, which he didn't know at the time, my boss passed him on I-40 going down McAllister to replace him. And then Gary Maynard asked me if I would come with him to the penitentiary to also be his assistant. And he said I had a week to get there. And I had my own house in Norman, and so within a week, basically all I took down there with me was a rocking chair, a TV, and a coffee pot. And he gave me a house in state housing. He said, you can stay in this house until something else comes up. And so I did. And of course, most of the time I spent at the penitentiary, but I was there with him from 1985 through 87. And we underwent a riot in 1985, July of 85. We were only there 6 months when a riot occurred and there were hostages taken. But he got promoted to associate director, and shortly thereafter, director of the Department of Corrections. And then I left the penitentiary in 87 and went to Howard McLeod, which was a minimum security facility, as a deputy warden. And then MacArthur, medium security facility nearby, underwent a riot in 1988. And it was a massive riot. They burned about 20 buildings, basically totaled the prison out. They took hostages. It was a long, drawn out riot, but it was obvious after the riot that a lot of the inmates that they had to transfer all the inmates out to other facilities, and they left just a small number of inmates to help kind of clean the place up. And so I just happened to be at Howard McLeod, which was probably 30 or 40 minutes away, and so they asked me if I would leave Howard McLeod and accept the appointment of warden to the MacArthur Correctional Center in Stringtown and basically rebuild the facility after the riot, which I reluctantly agreed to do. My boss asked me to do it. He said, think about it overnight. I went home and talked to my wife about it, and we decided to go ahead and do that. So I went to Stringtown, and then I was there for a total of 3 years. But during that 3 years, the warden at the penitentiary was in the military, the National Reserves, and he got called up to duty with the Desert Storm. And so he left, which vacated his position. And I was only 30 minutes away from McAllister, so they asked me to fill in for him while he was gone. And that lasted 7 months. So I drove back and forth. And then he came back and he stayed 3 months and he got promoted to regional director. And so that left that warden's position vacant again. So they asked me if I would move up to the penitentiary full time as a permanent warden, which I did. And then I was there for about 3 years. And then I left there and oversaw the reception process in Lexington. They were having a lot of issues with overcrowding and triple selling. And so they asked me to kind of take that over and supervise that, try to resolve some of those issues, which I accepted to do that. And then I was there for about 5 years. And then I had the opportunity to go to internal affairs. They had just created a new position in intelligence because they just had a gang-related homicide at Dick Connors. And Oklahoma had not foreseen much gang activity. It wasn't. We saw some gang activity, but it wasn't organized like it was at that time. Yeah. And so I had the opportunity to hire some investigators and kind of develop the intelligence unit. And so I did that for about 6 years. And then I was nearing my retirement, and a good friend of mine was the deputy director over community corrections. So I said, I've worked in every security level except for community. I'd like to get some experience in community corrections before I retired. And so he hired me as administrator of community corrections, and I oversaw about 30 halfway houses, work centers. I even supervised the 10th floor of the Oklahoma County Jail, which the Department of Corrections had a contract with Oklahoma County. They kept DOC inmates on the 10th floor as revenue, and it helped us, the Department of Corrections, out too with overcrowding. So
you've worked
so I kind of had the opportunity to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I never got bored with any job I had because I was always moving. I never had a job no more than 5 or 6 years before I was doing something different. So that 30 years went very fast. I had a great amount of experience, which I was really thankful for. I wasn't stuck in one job for 30 years.
Well, listen, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties that occurred at the very beginning. It was bound to happen because we usually have something that happens in it, and the gremlins hit me that time. So I don't even know how much I even said or whatever. But I do want to welcome everybody that's here, and they're listening to Dan Reynolds, who was the 26th warden of Oklahoma State Penitentiary, which is also known as Big Mac. Big Mac is kind of, Dan, I just recently went to interview a prisoner in Granite, and Granite is kind of a notorious prison in and of itself. And they gave me a little tour there, which is it was fascinating. There's like when you walk into Granite, which is in Southwest Oklahoma. I don't know when that thing was built, but it was built a long, long time ago.
Yes.
And the rock that was used, the granite, I guess, that was used to build that prison, they told me, was actually taken they built a railroad that went from Granite straight to McAllister, and they built the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister, Oklahoma, from the rock from Granite, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. That was really interesting. But Ronnie and I both got a tour of OS, the Rotunda, and that was a fascinating experience as well. Hey, what does a warden actually do? And it's not that, it's just because I just don't know what the warden position. I'm sure you supervise everything, but what's a day in the life of a warden?
Well, the warden is what it was explained to me when I started my career in being appointed warden. I learned very quickly. My boss told me, he says, with you sitting here in the warden's chair, you're responsible for everything that happens or fails to happen. And he said that in one sentence. And that really says a lot, because you supervise the entire facility. You supervise all the employees, to include contract personnel. You supervise and have oversight of the care and custody of the inmates. You're responsible for the maintenance, maintaining the facility in itself, the physical plant. You're responsible for community involvement in working with legislators, working with the community, putting on an annual rodeo, which I had no real experience in doing. And so I was fortunate. I had a lot of great staff, had a lot of tenured staff that had been there for a long time. And I grew very fast to develop a lot of respect and admiration for those line officers that work in the penitentiary day in and day out, 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. It's shift work. It's tedious work, very stressful work. Those guys aren't paid much, but they put their lives on the line every day so that they're there protecting us and our families at night while they're keeping the bad guys in. So I grew to have a lot of admiration, and I felt like my sole job was to provide those staff with the resources that they need to do their job. I knew that if I gave them the resources they needed, they would do their job. They just needed to tell me what they needed, and we created a partnership and said, hey, I'm not a correctional officer. I don't know what you need. I'm going to have to rely on you to tell me what you need to run a safe and secure environment and to protect staff as well. And so I had a real close relationship with the staff, and we worked very well together. And I was fortunate.
You mentioned the rodeo. I had the opportunity when my uncle was the warden there in McAllister to go to that a couple of times. It was an interesting deal. Can you kind of talk about that? Because the inmates are actually the cowboys in that, and they're out riding the bulls and the horses. And can you tell us a little bit about that? I don't know. I don't think they even do it anymore, do they? And then kind of
no. The last rodeo was in 2009. It started in 1940 by Warden Jess Dunn, and Warden Jess Dunn saw the prison rodeo in Texas, in the Department of Corrections in Texas. And he was so fascinated with it because he wanted to to implement a rodeo at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary with the sole focus and the sole benefit of raising money to provide indigent inmates with eyeglasses, with dentures, with items that typically the inmate would be responsible to pay for, but those that didn't have the money, they would have a fund set aside to help those indigent inmates. It could be for limbs, those that had lost limbs and needed a prosthesis, needed dental work, eyeglasses, things of that nature. They also, on down the road, they put money into the recreational fund. So they were able to show movies to inmates, like on Saturday night every week or once a month, they would have movies, and they would use the rodeo account to provide recreational opportunities for inmates as well. So
to help, basically offset the little bit of money that's coming to you from the state. So, and let me ask you, this is something that's kind of fascinating to me. I'm sure you walked the yard and you would walk the rows. Did you get to do that much? And if so, did you kind of get to know a lot of these inmates on almost like a first name basis?
Yes, I was in there. I tried to be in there every day. I eventually developed a schedule where I tried to visit every unit in every area at least once a week. And we had a lot of towers too. And I always tried to walk up at least one tower a week as well. We probably had about 9 operating towers. And so I tried to go up to one tower once a week, but what my daily routine eventually became towards the end, and I had to do it where I could maximize my time, was that I would go into my office early in the morning, like at 6:30 a.m., and I would do all my paperwork in the morning from about 6:30 to about 8 o'clock when the other staff came in and we started having meetings. And then at 8 o'clock, I met with my deputy wardens. I had 2 of them, and one was over programs, the other one was over security. And so we kind of lined out the day with them, and then any other meetings I had, I tried to get those done by 10 a.m. And then after 10 a.m., I tried to be inside from about 10 a.m. To about 4 or 4:30, and then I'd go back to my office for about an hour just to see what's came in, return phone calls, and then I tried to get out of there between 5 and 5:30 to walk across the street to my house and spend time with my wife and children. And that was a routine I had to learn, and I had to adjust it a few times, but that schedule seemed to work. But I felt like it was real critical to be inside. I was always told by my mentors that you really don't know what's going on inside unless you're actually in there.
Yeah.
You can sit behind the desk and have people tell you what's going on, but until you're actually in there and you see it, you smell it, you feel it. And if something wasn't right, I got to the point where I could pick up on it real quick, that I knew something wasn't right. But if I walked in and the staff were in a good mood, inmates were cordial, they were calm, they were working, or they were doing their daily routines, I knew everything was going on pretty good. But probably within 30 minutes, I could tell if everything was okay inside the penitentiary or not.
Yeah.
And of course, the staff, I got to know the staff on a first name basis. I got to know them, their families, and I think it was important for the staff to see the warden there with them. And if they were shorthanded, sometimes I took off my coat and told them to go on the unit, and I ran the control room. For a while. So,
well, when I went to Granite, it's listen, as a homicide detective, Ronnie and I, Ronnie and I were on. I mean, it was kind of interesting. It was interesting for us, believe it or not. We would go to these various prisons and stuff, and to interview people and stuff, both pre first 48 and after. And believe me, there was a difference between the two,
Big difference.
because because we would walk in there afterwards. You know, I can remember us walking through the waiting room on one occasion, and you know, some of the people that were, or the visiting room, and there happened to be a handful of families that were in there, and of course it was like we were having to walk past them, and then they were about ready to go nuts, and we're like, you know, quiet. And the poor inmate, you know, we would try to keep it to where they didn't see us going in there, because we didn't want people to even know. We would try to dress up like attorneys, you know, and really,
Right.
and try to avoid coming in there in uniform, etc., just because of obvious reasons.
Right.
But my point is that, you know, we're fascinated with it just like everybody else in the general public. It's kind of like that world. Nobody wants a prison in their backyard, but they want to know what in the heck is going on up in there. And they're fascinated by really, I mean, they're like, is it as bad as it sounds? And that's what I mean, is it like that? Is it as bad as what the general person thinks about what goes on up in there?
Well, you know, there's a lot of bad things that goes on in there. You know, you get the most violent offenders in the state of Oklahoma, and you put them all in one area, and then you know, you've got a lot of responsibility to provide safety not only for staff, but you got to provide safety for other inmates as well. And so you've really got a lot of responsibility to protect everybody. And a good example of that was in 1985 when I first went there. You know, we had a riot after 6 months, and the new warden was trying to implement some new policies and procedures to basically take back control of the penitentiary. The warden felt like the inmates had too much control, and he was trying to crack down and take control back. And the riot occurred basically as to who was going to have control. And after that riot, you know, prior to that riot, there was inmates. You know, you had over 1,000 inmates that had basically free reign of the yard. They can go from one area into another area, and there was a lot of freedom of movement. And as a result of the riot, after the riot, they implemented a 23-hour lockdown where they locked all the inmates up and implemented a permanent policy that says inmates will receive 1 hour exercise 5 days a week, 3 showers a week, and they're basically locked up 23 hours a day. And we were afraid that a lot of the older inmates, we thought we would have trouble out of them, but the older inmates finally told us, they said, you know, we are so glad that you locked it down, because they were getting to the point that they felt unsafe, right, because they had a newer type of inmate coming in that the older convicts weren't used to. And these inmates were coming in for drug offenses, and they were high on drugs that the older convicts, you know, wasn't used to. And they really didn't know how to associate with the younger ones, and vice versa. And so once we locked it down, the older inmates felt safe. And to this day, it's basically still locked down 23 hours a day. So it's a much safer environment today than what it was 30 years ago when I was there. So basically, but it's really staff intensive too, because you have to take everything to the inmate in a cell. You know, the inmate can't come to you. You know, the medical has to go to the inmates. You got to feed the inmates. You got to take food to their cell. So it's really staff intensive doing it that way. But it's a lot safer for inmates, a lot safer for staff, and it's a lot safer for the public. So it's a much safer environment today than what it was. And today they don't have as many inmates as they did 30 years ago. When I was there, we had around 1,600 inmates, and today, you know, right now there's between 500 and 700.
Wow,
so
that's a big difference.
There's a big difference. A lot of the older buildings of the penitentiary, they had to close down just because of deterioration. You know, after the 73 riot, with the court ruling, they had to close down the east and the west cell house. And then within recent times, they closed down the last old housing unit, which was F cell house, right off the rotunda. The rotunda is shut down as well. And since
Amanda,
they
show that
closed down,
picture. Show that picture of McAllister Prison if you were able to get that on there. Throw that up there. It's one of the prisons. No, that's the prison. I think that's, yeah, there you go. And what he's talking about is basically the rotunda. It's that thing where it looks like a skylight, the big skylight there behind Oklahoma. And am I right? Am I right,
yes,
Dan?
that's correct. That's correct. That's rotunda.
Yeah. So when you say the eastern, that those cell blocks that we're looking at right there, when you look at that building right there, those cells that would be where those windows are, that's closed down now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what you're looking at is the East Cell House, and they held about 350 inmates on the East Cell House, and then the West Cell House, which was the sister cell house to the east, also occupied around 350 inmates. The West Cell House was known for inmates that were black inmates when they were segregated. They put all the black inmates in the West Cell House, all the white inmates went to the east. Yeah. And then later on in 1935, they built the F cell house, and it had 4 runs to it, and each run held about 100 inmates. There was another cell house called the New Cell House that was built before the F cell house, but it was destroyed during the '73 riot, and they tore it down shortly after the riot. But
so there's one of his books. Yep, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, kind of echoing what Jason said earlier. I think you and I probably went to 7 to 10 different prisons our time together, probably. And I just want to say how much I appreciated the DOC, the guards themselves. I don't know their proper term, but there was more than once where we had to walk across the yard to get to a building where someone was at to go interview. And it was weird. Obviously, it was a prison, and we weren't inmates, but I never felt unsafe or anything. I felt like the guards knew what they were doing. They were getting us to the proper place. It was all safe. And I mean, there was countless inmates we had passed along the way. So
true. But we also had our head on a swivel as well. And we also saw the scouts that were out watching and reporting to somebody as to who's here.
Yeah.
Or somebody's here.
Yes.
And one thing that as we usually say, time's flying, and I want to get to some of the stuff you've done also, Dan. But before we get to some of your books and things, sorry I had a little technical difficulty. I don't know if you talked about this when I was gone, but you oversaw some executions while you were there. Is that correct? Can you kind of walk people through how that is for, I guess, everybody? I mean, obviously we know what happens at the end, but like what the inmate has to go through in their last hours, what the staff has to deal with, and just so people can realize that, it's not just this movie thing where it's over like that. It's a lengthy process, I would assume.
Yes, it's a lengthy and complicated process, and there's a lot of hours that go in preparation for it. And I can recall, I was there 30 years ago, and I was assigned the second and third execution by lethal injection. The first one was done in the early 90s, and where they had the execution area was in the old administration building. And after that first execution, they ran into some areas that was real cumbersome. Once the inmate was executed, they had to remove the body and put him in a real small elevator, which was fairly small and was really cumbersome. And then they had to walk him down, a flight of stairs. But when they built the H unit in the early 90s, they specifically built that a death row unit as well as a death row chamber to carry out those executions, keeping in mind, all the things that they would be faced with, and try to make it a smooth process. And since I did the first one in that building, There were a couple of recommendations after the first execution, but they were real minor. One dealt with the length of the telephone cord, going from the witness area out to the hallway, so the director could step outside away from the witnesses to talk to the governor's office for a last minute say of execution or what have you. But those things were really minor. But prior to that, we did a lot of practicing. We had execution drills pretty much on a routine basis. I actually played an inmate at one time when I was a warden's assistant. Warden Maynard went to Texas and observed a lot of executions before Oklahoma did any lethal injections to get their policies, procedures, to talk to the staff, to get their policies, to kind of bring back some policies that we could implement here in Oklahoma, which helped out a great deal. But when I was a warden assistant, I had the opportunity to sit in on some 30-day notifications. When the court sets a death sentence, then the inmate is given a 30-day notification.
Okay.
And we basically knew that, there was 9 different sets of appeals and that the inmates would eventually get a stay, especially early on in his appeals. And it was just protocol that you had to go through the 30-day notification. But we took it very seriously, and we would call in the inmate 30 days of his execution date. We would explain the process to him, talk about, disposition of property, his next kin, what visitors would he want to invite to the execution? Did he have a spiritual leader or advisor he would like to be in the execution room with them? And then after that meeting, I always made an effort when I knew I was getting real close and it looked like we were going to carry out the execution. I made an effort to sit down with the inmate with a barrier between us, to just discuss just with the inmate, myself, just by ourselves. And I basically explained everything that we were going to do, what was going to happen, what to expect, so that it would kind of put him at ease. And
did you see a big change? And again, we're flying through this. So briefly before we get into your books, did you notice a big change with the inmate himself and the staff, like the day before or the day of? Was there, and I'm not trying to be morbid, but just how did you guys deal with that? And then let's talk about your books and stuff.
Well, during that, the last 24 hours, it's very stressful. You could hear a pin drop. You go on death row and it's quiet. And within 24 hours, we would the warden and a cell extraction team would go to the inmate cell and actually escort him out of his regular cell and put him in a holding area, which was right next to the execution area, within the last 24 hours. And in that 24 hours, his whole world changes because there's a correctional officer posted outside his cell, keeping a log, making notations, everything the inmate's doing, when he was fed last, who his visitors were, basically logging any significant events. And then, of course, the inmate had a request of his last meal, and within reason, we would obligate that. The inmate would have his last meal. But the staff,
what do you mean? Inmate, what do you mean by within reason on the last meal? Just out of curiosity.
Well, when I was there 30 years ago, we had an inmate that had requested a food item that was atypical. It was not a food item that you would normally get in Oklahoma, and it was it was a type of fish, and And so we had to really jump through hoops to try to find the exact type of food the inmate requested. And at that time, there was really no minimum or no maximum amount of food. If he wanted, 24 hot dogs, we'd go out and get him 24 hot dogs, But as time went on, and after I left, they kind of tightened down on the food request, where it's a reasonable amount and it's food items that are common that you could easily obtain. So that cut out a lot of the difficulty I went through initially with trying to comply with inmates' last request.
Yeah.
Let's
mention some of your books. Yeah. Let's throw up some of those books.
Okay. I guess I'll just start with the one of the first ones I did. It's called Caged Wisdom, Learning to See Through the Bars. And after I retired, even before I retired, I was an auditor for the American Correctional Association, and I was a certified auditor, which means the American Correctional Association would send me out to prisons all across the United States to do prison audits for accreditation purposes. And each facility that was accredited went through accreditation process every 3 years. And it covered tool control, key control, budgets, personnel, probably over 300 standards that they had to meet, and a team would come in and do that. Well, during my visits, I used to see a lot of inmates sitting in day rooms, and a lot of them had Bibles, and I had visited with several inmates, and I talked to an inmate. He said that he'd never read the Bible in his life, and he was interested in it, and he just opened it up, and he was in the Old Testament, and he said, I started reading the Bible, and he said, I really got discouraged reading. I was in the Old Testament. I got lost in it, and I started laughing. I said, well, I even get lost in the Old Testament, because a lot of it's pretty difficult. Well, during that time, when I was working, I wanted my son to read the Bible, and he wasn't doing it as fast as I wanted him to. So I thought I'd help him. And as I read the Bible in the morning before I went to work, I'd highlight scriptures that I felt like the Lord would want my son to know in regards to how to live a good Christian life. And so I would highlight those areas. Well, when I got finished with that, I copied those off and gave it to him and said, you can read these and this will help you. Instead of reading the whole Bible, you can read these notes. Mm-hmm. And so he said, okay. But in the middle of writing that, when I was visiting these prisons, I said, you know what? I said, I realized, an inmate's reading level is at a 7th grade level. So I knew a lot of inmates couldn't read very well. So I thought, this outline I just did for my son, I said, this would be great for inmates because it's real easy to read. It's an outline form. Yeah. And not every chapter in the Bible's covered. And so I just took that and converted it towards inmates. And I had a publisher, Tate Publishing, out of Mustang, Oklahoma, and it was run by a Christian publisher, Dr. Tate there. And once he found out, I wrote the book, and then I developed a ministry where I was going to send that book out to every prison in the United States, and people would buy a book. And I said, well, if you buy a book, I'm going to donate this book in your honor and ship it to any prison that you would want it sent to. And so I started getting sponsors, and people would give me $300, which would pay for a lot of books because the book was only $3. The publisher found out what I was doing, and they said, hey, we want to join you and we want to help you out. And so they paid for all the shipping, which saved me a lot of money. So we ended up shipping that book to every prison in the United States, every state, federal.
I think that's pretty incredible.
Prison. Yeah,
that's incredible. So, listen, in about a minute and a half, you got like a minute and a half. Let's throw up each book and tell us about 30 seconds on each book, just the gist of it. I know the history of the riot. That's great. Throw that up there, Amanda. There you go. That's one of the books that he wrote. Oh, that's the history of the prison rodeo. The prison rodeo.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yes,
Go ahead.
that book has a lot of colored pictures in it. It covers from 1940 to the last rodeo in 2009.
Okay.
That's been a very popular book. It talks about the history, not only the history of the rodeo, but also the history of the arena. The arena itself, the history is fascinating to read that. There's a lot of pictures on the various events. Reba McEntire was in there. She sang at the national anthem in the 1977 rodeo. There was a lot of other celebrities attended the rodeo. Ray Price attended the rodeo in the 70s. It's a rodeo that nobody else will see. It's a rodeo all in itself.
Throw another one up there, Amanda, right quick. So we've got, there you go. This one here is interesting to me too. Tell us briefly about that.
Okay. This book contains 50 of the most hilarious, bizarre, and unusual correctional stories ever told. When I was visiting facilities during my audits across the United States, I would always ask wardens and other staff, I said, tell me the most hilarious or bizarre or unusual correctional story. And I would ask them to send it to me. Well, I never got any stories, but they would sit down and tell me the story. And I said, hey, you tell me your story. I won't use your name or your facility. So they opened up to me, and I had tons and tons of stories. And I took all those stories and narrowed it down to the top 50 of the most hilarious stories. And this book is a good seller. It's one of my best sellers. People seem to really enjoy it. The stories aren't real long. Some of them are just a page long, but some of them, they may not be real funny. Some of them are just outright bizarre. You wouldn't believe what inmates will do.
What else we got? What other ones?
Any other books? There we go. Oklahoma prison riots.
Okay. This was one of the books that covered the 4 major prison riots in Oklahoma history. It covered the 73 riot at McAllister, the 85 riot at McAllister, the Stringtown riot in 88, and the Dick Connors riot in 83. And I wasn't really satisfied with that book because the publisher had me put 2 pictures per page. And when the book came out, the pictures were real small. So I took the 73 riot and made a separate book out of it entitled The Riot at 73, and made the pictures a lot bigger. I was there. I was 16 years old. I was in high school. I was en route to Lake Eufaula on a fishing trip, turned on the radio, found out they're having prison riot at McAllister. I drove down there, didn't know where I was going. I followed the smoke, drove up to the East Gate, and that picture on the front of the book is a picture I actually took. I just happened to have the camera, and I was 16 years old. I stayed there all afternoon, took pictures of it, not realizing that 18 years later, I'd be the warden in that penitentiary.
Yeah, that's crazy. Let me tell you something. We're about out of time. We are. That's about it, unfortunately. I'm going to tell you something real quick. We always heard about the prison riots, and we heard that the 73 riots that they actually were called, the Tulsa Police Department actually sent a contingency of officers that were flying down there. And this is the story that we heard real quick. And I know we got to get off of here, but I remember I know you've heard it too, Ronnie, where they said that the moment that they heard that the green shirts from Tulsa were coming, they were like, we're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there was a reputation of the Tulsa cops that they weren't playing, and they were going there and they were going to take care of business, and the inmates wanted no part of it. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's a great place for us to leave for today. I'm going to tell you right now.
Hey, I do believe that story to be absolutely true. They were frightened of Tulsa PD, and there's a lot of Tulsa police officers' pictures in that book.
Cool. I'm going to look for it. I really am, Dan.
And I think you have another one getting ready to come out, and I know we got to go, but Amanda put up the Amazon link earlier, so everyone check that out. Dan's got all kinds of books. Show him some support, and
yes, please.
I can't thank you enough for being on here, Dan. I really do. I appreciate it.
Yep. Hey, thanks, Dan.
Really enjoyed it.
Stick around on the backside. We're going to play some music. I want to thank everybody. Thanks, Ronnie, for hooking us up with him. And maybe we're going to probably have to have him back just to talk a little bit more in depth about other things, because I could talk to him for days. So, Dan, we're going to hang around. Thanks again, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It's the Eclipse fault. I'm sorry. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.